A nurse who spent her career walking into rooms at 3 o'clock in the morning to help strangers through the worst night of their lives. A man from Springfield who thought he was going to a house in Virginia for one thing and walked into something else completely different. And a husband who wanted out of his marriage without paying for a divorce or splitting custody of his daughter, which is where the whole thing starts. Christine Benson grew up on Long Island. Her family says that she was thoughtful and wise beyond her years. She got her nursing degree at Quinnipiac in 2007. She became a sexual assault nurse examiner, which means that she was the one who came in the early morning hours to sit with a stranger on the worst night of that stranger's life, and she collected the evidence off of that woman's body while keeping her calm enough to get through the exam that most people can't get through. She was in her early 20s. She ended up supervising some of the other nurses and training the new hires. Think about who you have to be as a person to volunteer to do that for a living. She met Brendan Banfield when they were both in college as freshmen in 2002. They got married in June 2010. Their daughter Valerie came along, and the family moved down to Fairfax County, Virginia, when Brendan took a job with the IRS. Christine took a job at the pediatric ICU. Then the pandemic landed on her floor. A man named Rodrigo Valderrama woke up out of a weeks-long coma in her hospital, and hers was the first face he saw. She shaved him. She set him up on a Zoom call so that he could see his family. He said she was an angel to him, and that spring he invited the Banfields out to a party in a park. At that party, Christine mentioned that she was hiring an au pair from South America to help with Valerie. Rodrigo was born in Colombia, and she asked him for restaurant recommendations because she wanted the young woman moving into her house to find some food that tasted like home. Juliana Magalhaes was 20 years old and living outside Sao Paulo when she moved into the house in October 2021. The au pair arrangement is a strange thing when you look at it head on. A woman in her early 20s flies in from another country, takes up your spare room, learns your kid's nap schedule and which cabinet the good snacks are in, and on paper, she's an employee, while in practice, she's family, which also handles the car seat straps. Most of the time, it works out fine. Around August 2022, Juliana and Brendan started sleeping together. She testified that within a few weeks of starting that, he was already floating the idea of getting rid of his wife. He told her Christine was a terrible mother and a danger to Valerie, and that his marriage was a prison he had no way of getting out of. Brendan was a special agent with the IRS criminal investigation by then, promoted in 2019 after a decade of auditing people's taxes, which means his whole career was built on catching people who thought they were smarter than the paperwork. He did not want to pay for a divorce. He did not want to split custody of his daughter. The plan started at Christine's own laptop. The two of them sat down there in January 2023 and made a Gmail account in her name. They used that account to open a profile on FetLife, a social network for people into kink with about 13 million members. They put up a photo of Christine in a bathing suit. They took turns logging in from her machine so that it would look like it was all pointing back to her. Then he went shopping. Brendan bought a handgun. He took Juliana to a shooting range. They swapped their phones for new ones. He started leaving for work earlier than he needed to and stopping for breakfast at places near the house over and over for weeks, so that by the time he needed a morning routine on camera, he would already have one. That is a federal investigator building himself an alibi in advance, and he was not as good at it as he thought he was. While this was going on, someone started talking to the fake Christine on the FetLife account. Joe Ryan lived over in Springfield, Virginia. He was 39. His friends knew that he used that site, and he was pretty open about it. And you have to understand what he believed he was walking into. He thought he was talking to a married woman named Christine, and by February, the conversation had moved on to a platform called Telegram, where he was asked to bring a knife for a rape fantasy that both adults had supposedly agreed to. He came over and brought the knife. Christine was off work that Friday. Brendan had her cell phone with him that morning, and he used it to disable the automatic locks on the house. Then he texted Joe to park in the driveway and walk in. Then he turned the phone off and left it in the kitchen drawer. He drove to the McDonald's up the road. Juliana told Christine that she was taking Valerie to the zoo. Instead, she parked down the street with the 4-year-old in the back seat. Joe pulled in. Juliana called Christine's phone first, the one that's sitting in the kitchen drawer turned off, and then she called Brendan, who was standing in the McDonald's bathroom, and came straight home. They went in through the basement together, left Valerie down there, and they went upstairs. Christine heard someone on the stairs and called out to her husband that the man in the bedroom had a knife. The next minute comes from Juliana on the stand. She said Joe looked up at them, shocked, and Brendan shot him in the head with his IRS service weapon. Brendan picked up the knife Joe had carried in and stabbed Christine in the neck 7 times. Juliana saw Joe still moving and shot him in the chest with Brendan's new handgun. And then came the part that took some real work. They moved Joe's body into position and transferred Christine's blood onto his hands and clothing so that if you walked into that room, you would read it as a stranger attacking a wife and a husband getting there in time to shoot the intruder. Officers found no forced entry anywhere in the house. They found Valerie unhurt in the basement. They found Brendan kneeling over Christine with his hands on her neck, telling them that he was applying pressure to slow the bleeding. That story held for 570 days. Fairfax County Police worked it as a home invasion interrupted, and the 2 people who called it in went right on living in that house together. 8 months later, investigators found a framed photo of Brendan and Juliana sitting on his nightstand. Crime scene photos taken months apart showed her clothes, and her pictures had drifted into the master bedroom. But the blood is what broke the case. Analysts concluded it had been placed on Joe's hands rather than coming out of a wound. Juliana got arrested first in October 2023. Brendan was indicted in September 2024. The following month, she pleaded guilty to manslaughter and agreed to testify against him in court. And she told the jury that she gave in because she couldn't carry the guilt and couldn't carry the shame around anymore. The trial ran 3 weeks in January 2026, and the whole fight was over the digital evidence. Detective Brendan Miller, the department's own forensic examiner, analyzed dozens of devices and concluded Christine was the person operating them when those accounts were built and used. A peer reviewer went through his work and agreed with him. And then it got strange. The department moved Miller out of digital forensics and into child exploitation cases. And he got on the stand and told the jury that the transfer was tied to his work on the case. Both sides agreed nobody can prove who is sitting at a keyboard. Brendan testified in his own defense. It's the only time he's told his version out loud. He said he saw a strange car outside and came in through the back, and he heard sounds he took for sex. And he did not call 911 because he assumed his wife was cheating on him. He said he shot Joe after finding him attacking her. He also told the jury that he'd been on his way to a work meeting about a promotion that morning. Prosecutors put his IRS supervisor on the stand, who said he was in Baltimore that day and no such meeting existed. Brendan spent 37 minutes in a McDonald's. The jury did not buy a single word of his testimony. They convicted him on February 2nd, 2026. Juliana got 10 years, the statutory maximum, more than the prosecutors even asked for. She faces deportation to Brazil when she finishes. On June 5th, the judge in the case gave Brendan life without parole plus 8 more years and told the room that the cruelty and calculation in this case reflected his evilness. He stood up and said that he was innocent. His lawyer noticed an appeal in July. Christine's father and her sister gave their first interview after the sentencing because they didn't want the salacious version of the trial standing in as the record of her. Her sister got asked the question most people always ask, which is why she didn't leave. She said she will not put that on any victim, let alone her own sister. Thanks for listening to 10-Minute Murder, bingeable true crime stories. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and here's an email. Subject, from a retired detective. Joe, 26 years, most of it in property crimes, last 8 in violent crimes, retired in 2021. I say that up front so that you know where this is coming from. I listen to a lot of these shows, and most of them make me want to throw my phone. Not because they get details wrong. Everybody gets details wrong, but because of the assumption underneath. The assumption is always that somebody knew and didn't act. Sometimes that's true. More often, it's that the information was spread across 4 agencies and 3 counties, and nobody had a reason to put it together until after. You do less of that than most, I noticed. Where I'd push back is on interrogation. I've heard you describe a confession as though the room did the work. Sometimes the room does. Sometimes the guy walked in already needing to say it out loud and we just didn't stop him. Those look identical in a transcript, and they're not the same thing at all. If you ever want a set of eyes on a script before you record, I'll read it for free. I'm retired and my wife has run out of projects for me. Regards, Frank in Illinois. Frank, thank you for the email, taking the time to send it, and also thank you for listening. And by the time you hear this, I will have already replied to this email asking for a specific on the interrogation. If I was suggesting that the room is what gets the confession, that I didn't mean for it to come across that way, and I'm not sure what episode or what episodes you're referring to. Now, what I have said in the past, multiple times, is that I think polygraphs are BS. Polygraphs are just a tool that police use in order to get you to confess. They can and will lie to you and pretend like you failed a polygraph when you passed it or it was inconclusive, just to get you to confess to something that they think that you did. Because the accuracy on a polygraph is no better than basically a coin flip. I have said that maybe a dozen times on this podcast. But again, Frank, thank you for the email and thank you for the critique, and maybe I will send some scripts your way, especially if they involve a confession. Hey, if you're a brand new listener to this podcast, welcome. Make sure you do me a huge favor and hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. And also, if you listen on a couple of different podcast listening apps, subscribe on all of them. Like for me personally, I use an Apple phone, so I subscribe to podcasts that I listen to often on Apple Podcasts and also on Spotify, because I use both of those to listen to podcasts. And I don't want to, switch back and forth depending on what podcast I want to listen to. You can go to 10minutemurder.com and find more places to listen, more links to where you can listen to the podcast. You can also find links to where you can follow the show on social media. So please do that. It's at 10minutemurder.com. And that's going to do it. That's your episode for today. Thanks again for listening to 10 Minute Murder. See you next time.